Welcome back to Block TV. It's now time for Trader's Take. And while the markets seem to have settled down so far this week, it certainly is an exciting time. So, to find out how the crypto market is doing and see where we might be headed, we're joined from New York by our very own technical analyst, Joe Saz. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. How's it going, Asher?
Not too bad, Joe. All right, so looking at the technical sheets, looking at the charts, what's standing out for you today?
All right, well, we're going to jump into the charts because there really isn't too much outside of them to really discuss first. I mean, what I'm seeing here is we had this nice follow through, right? You know, we kind of reached the area of the wick and then the market made the decision to pop out a little bit, but that was met with some sharp downside action. But obviously it was capped out. We're still trading at, right around where this wick, obviously started. So I think this market, I'm skeptical. I'm a little skeptical to say that bullish momentum is exhausted, but I'm also pretty confident that a pump is not going to change the overall market trend. It definitely incited hope. It incited a lot of very positive emotion for the bulls. But as we can see here on the chart, the bulls, in the whole run-up, the bulls were slowly but surely exhausting their resources. And, all through this run-up, it was very small, shallow upside moves. Some would say that grind is actually what was needed to break this, but it was a whale at the end of the day. That's the fact. So I'm saying the trend is intact. There's volatility on both sides of the spectrum. The $500 million USD in liquidations on BitMEX on this day is telling me that volatility is back, and I'm just telling everyone to tie their shoes because volatility is definitely, it's up and it's down. There's volatility to the upside and downside, and I'm pretty sure that we're looking at some volatility to the downside pretty soon. I don't know how far we'll pull back just yet, but we got to see. We really have. I'm not going to make any major decisions. I'm not going to. The reason why is I'm not going to assume this is going to act as support. Typically, when we move, when you move through a resistance area, typically it does become support. And even like this was support until we broke down, and now technically this line, this 5,800 to 6,000 area will be resistance. But again, I'm not really convinced because this move was so fast and so violent, and then we hung out in this area for so long. I'm not 100% convinced that this will act as strong support. So we need to see volatility.
But I got to ask, Joe, I mean, there's such optimism in the air. I mean, you're seeing around the crypto sphere, there's so many people pumping it. This is the spring they've all been waiting for so long. Finally, the frost has thawed. I mean, surely that's going to help pump up markets a little bit and maybe break through some of those resistance barriers in the past. So you think this is all just hype, and at the end of the day, the whales control the market, and where they go, the market goes with them?
Well, the whales started this, and yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a lot of hope in the air, but the reason why I'm not taking that, putting too much weight on that is because, again, that slow, steady grind to 4,300 tells me that the bulls had, again, it was small amounts of money being thrown into the market. And that's why I still think that those bulls are exhausted. That's why I feel like this move to the upside is going to start making a shallow descent or even a sharp descent down. And I'm not sure which just yet, because like you said, the hope is still so palpable. Social media is just screaming with hope. People are so convinced the bottom is in, and this is proof. And so I do think that there is potential for a slower downside move. Again, on volatility in the volatile Bitcoin sense, we're used to just crazy action. This almost feels like, early 2018, type action, but it only lasted a day and we've kind of leveled out. So, as hopeful as these bulls are, again, the trend is still intact. So currently the trend is still intact in my opinion. And I don't think that hope is really enough to shape the market. It takes money. And if the $100, 100,000 people throwing $100 at it every other Friday or every Friday is starting to, that's the steam that was the grind, then all it's going to take is some sort of snap to break out of that. And that's kind of the psychological moment that I'm looking for, is that psychological breakdown when the perma bulls have lost hope. And right now there's way, way, way too much hope for that despair phase to really be considered. part of the market, or having been part of the market since the crash.
I mean, and
So
couldn't we see this sort of limited volatility, the sort of volatility that we were seeing back 2017, 18, now being limited to just a small run and then a stabilization? Couldn't we see that as a positive sign for perhaps a slightly more maturing market, a little bit more stability, or do you think it's just a one-off hit?
I mean, you bring up a very good point, and it's really important to consider these things. But right now, popping up this high and then going sideways is not a good thing, because again, it was one actor that definitely set off a chain of events, and there is definitely a trend still intact by certain metrics. Again, this can be like, if say I was a diehard bull right now, I think I could produce a strong argument to say that that we're moving up. But I still think no matter what, there's a pullback ahead of us. We're strongly overbought right now. I think we're, RSI is around 90 or so. It's grossly overbought. So no matter what, we're looking at a pullback, and that's kind of going to be how I reevaluate the situation. If the pullback is violent, then obviously it just means volatility is back. And I think this could draw on for like the next 3 weeks. If we do go sideways, like you said, could that be a testament to some sort of positive act in the market? I think that's more likely that kind of sideways action after pumps is probably going to be something I'm a little more comfortable with once we break all-time highs again, or once we're definitely out of the mud. I still think like if this is the bottom is very weird, and I'm not comfortable with calling this a bottom yet. There was like 3 days of price discovery, like it's really confusing feeling, and then a strong pump out, so it wasn't like this really calculated bottom. It was like hey, should I buy in now, or is this thing going to the floor? And that bottom just was a very confusing bottom. Just doesn't feel like that psychological shift that we were discussing.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I guess the market has a bit of a way to go before we can look to see any defining trends and back towards this bullish run. But let's take it outside of Bitcoin and take a look at some of the other currencies we were talking about the other day. Yesterday, we were saying Bitcoin Cash seeing some massive jumps, sort of the winner off yesterday, up 50%, I believe, at some points. What's happening there?
So yeah, it looks like they capped out at a 24% run on the day. Started to pull back, and here it is. Let's see, I want to see which. So yeah, the second day actually had more volume. That's interesting. It's always interesting when you have a lot of price action and not that much volume. I mean, this price action, as you can see, measured against the first candle, that it's almost like sellers pulled their sells, and they're in the order book. This is where sellers probably started putting their sells in the order book and capped out the upside. So that's why there's a lot more volume. So it looks like there was some action, but it definitely started breaking down. And this could, I wasn't paying attention to the order book, but this could also mean they started, putting buys in, and sellers started, eating into them. Even though this candle is green, that doesn't necessarily mean the most amount of activity was buys. This could definitely mean there's a lot of buying support. And who knows, maybe Bitmain was selling into that. So I didn't watch the order book. I didn't see how crazy it was. But I'm not going to assume anything yet. This was a huge candle with 24% price action, which is significant, but though it is less than 45% action the prior day and less than half the volume. So it's interesting. We got to pay attention. We're looking at an inverted kind of hammer doji situation here. It's starting to look a little bearish. So we're definitely looking at a pullback. I'm expecting this pullback. I'm expecting a pullback. Let's look at this. Let's look at something, a pullback to around about, I want to say like more like a 200 range. Let's check this previous line real quick. This is, I think, kind of going to be, around this like 230 range. That'll be a comfortable pullback to me.
And yesterday you were making sort of claims of potential market manipulation, saying that in a crypto like Bitcoin Cash, there's sort of not that popular. People are skeptical. I mean, do you stand by those statements today?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that's not going to change. And that the reason is because there's definitely a dumpening in the midst for something like Bitcoin Cash. Bitmain reporting all these terrible losses and probably a lot of lawsuits and all kinds of really negative action going on in the Bitmain circle. They're going to have to sell Bitcoin Cash. They're going to have to crash the market. So, I mean, if I was in Bitmain, I'd say like, this is great, awesome. We have some hope in the market. This is an excellent time for me to start taking my, dumping my stacks. So to me, this really isn't that significant. I really do think that Bitmain is going, and I don't have an exact number, but they own a massive amount of Bitcoin Cash, to the point where they were even burning some to try to bring buyers into their atmosphere. So yeah, that's going to stand as long as Bitmain is in big trouble, which isn't going away. They lost their ability to IPO. They lost all kinds of fundraising. They lost all kinds of people that were thinking about putting money and backing them. So as long as that's in the air, the Bitmain problem is in the air. Bitcoin Cash is definitely going to be an asset that should be going down. If there is upside, I do believe that it will be capped pretty quickly, especially if it starts getting to levels where Bitmain is going to need the money, and it's like a profitable area and there's a lot of support.
Right. So so let's take a look at some of the other currencies going on. What are we getting from XRP, Ether? Where are you at seeing other big movements?
So ETH, here we are, 9 sell, and that was actually the same thing with Bitcoin on the daily. We're on a 9 sell. So here we're starting to see some 9 sells, though they obviously didn't work out on the weekly. Here we are. All right. So we're looking at a 9 sell. This kind of turned bearish neutral. Kind of a spinning top candle here. So, the upside looks like this line is capping us out. This ascending triangle is kind of capping us out. It's kind of, yeah, interesting. I'm going to have to play around with this one a little more. But I am happy to see that there is resistance that was taken seriously. Even though we did technically close above this resistance line, I'm not going to take this close too seriously, because it was immediately, the following day, we closed beneath it into a very bearish outlook. So here we are, 9 sell. Let's pay attention. Friday is, I kind of think Fridays are bullish days, but let's pay attention. I do think we're looking at downside, and we're looking at an inevitable pullback on across the board. And real quick, look at this volume, the big volume candle here too. So it's definitely all justified. Now pump out of here, Litecoin. Let's see. 28, 10, and everything's kind of turning inverted hammer. This is telling me that the bulls are out of steam. We briefly closed above this old support line. I wonder how far back this goes. Yeah, this is just kind of a choppy space where there was a lot of action. So this isn't really a solid support line, but or a trend line, or a resistance or support line. Either way, this is just kind of like for reference. And I think we're going to start moving back down across the board. And the main question is, how violent will it be? XRP moving back down, bearish neutral spinning top. We have a bearish neutral spinning top. So let's get back into this channel with XRP before we see anything crazy happen. Same thing. We're on this is going to probably see a green 5, and then we're going to switch to a red 1 here pretty soon. So I think across the board, everything's looking at a pullback. We're on an 8 with Tron TRX, currently sitting on a neutral spinning top. The previous day, a pretty strong inverted hammer. So let's keep watching. We're looking at a 9 sell. I really think that these 9s are going to pan out at some point. I really do think so. I just can't imagine that one single whale, even with all the hope in the market, was enough to take us out of the bear trend.
So if you're to have your sort of final word on the piece, your final crystal ball gaze, you'd say perhaps maybe a little optimism over the weekend, but you think it's inevitably gonna turn back down. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and again, I've been saying 3 weeks for a reason, and that's because on the weekly 9 sell, I still think that sometimes they aren't acted on right away, and I'm giving it about 2 weeks for that to be acted on. So I think volatility is kind of it's in the air, but obviously we had 2 days of some serious action with the pullback on the second day, and now we're sitting on a neutral third after that pump. So I do think that we're looking at a pullback at the very least to somewhere around a 50% retrace from that pump action before we start seeing some sort of market decision. What do people accept as a price? I really don't think people are going to accept this 5,000 move to the upside as concrete. I just can't imagine that in a realistic sense, big money, countries, state sponsors, banks, etc., they're looking at this and they're saying, that was hilarious, but I want more blood. And we're going to start looking at probably another 500 million in liquidations to the downside here very soon. Those are the guns I'm sticking to for now.
All right, our very own Joe Saz, technical analyst from New York, giving his prediction that although we're hoping to see this run play out, that there might be a bit of a pullback and we should all be perhaps a little wary before jumping in with both feet. All right, Joe Saz, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, stay with us on BLOCKTV, or you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or on our website at blocktv.com. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.